Hi again, everyone. Okay, so we left off here, right up here with the snowball. So we're going to talk about G proteins and how they, working along with cyclic AMP, are going to accelerate a cascading effect in the metabolic activity of a cell. So first of all, you have to get hormone to bind a protein receptor. Once that has happened, the protein receptor will activate the G protein. Okay, then adenylyl cyclase converts ATP to cyclic AMP, which is over here. ATP to cyclic AMP. And you get ion channels opening, enzymes being activated. And I'm sorry, this is so stretched out. It's weird looking. Our first messenger examples for this one is going to be epinephrine, norepinephrine. So the NE and NID, nudido. Calcitonin, parathyroid hormone, antidiuretic hormone, adrenocorticothyroid hormone, follicular stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and thyroid stimulating hormone. The example over here, if we're going the other way, from cyclic AMP through phosphodiesterase to AMP, we're going to reduce our enzyme activity. And these first messengers are going to be epinephrine and norepinephrine, which we saw in the nervous system. Oh, please click. We saw the nervous system if you took AMP1, which hopefully you did. All right, so these, again, cyclic AMP or CAMP, and some people call it CAMP, is the second messenger here, and it's going to activate kinases, which here we've got adenylate cyclase, and then a kinase is getting activated. And kinases typical roles, there's an exception in microbiology, but the typical role for kinases is to add a phosphate group. And that word is phosphorylate. And hopefully you heard that in Bio 1. But the phosphodiesterase is going to go ahead and remove, it's not a kinase, but it's go ahead and remove the cyclic form. So it's just adenosine monophosphate. Make sure I got all that. Yep. Okay. So it is good to know, again, kinases' general role are to, let's do this, highlighter, are to phosphorylate, to add a phosphate group. Okay. And because the pen isn't working, we'll try P. Oh, this guy's not working either. Shenanigans. I'm going to start beating my head against the wall. I'm not going to start that, but I feel like it. And these videos would be a lot shorter if the technology would work. So just a reminder, P phosphate 04 minus 3. You don't need to worry about this number here, but this is a phosphate group, PO4. All right, so moving along, this is one we just covered. And here are the steps that aren't outlined that well, I think, in the next figure, but we'll go with it. So G protein, again, activates here in the next diagram. We're going to see phospholipase C, so PLC. This will trigger the cascade I've been mentioning over and over again, receptor cascade, by producing diacylglycerol. Now, you can just remember DAG. That's fine with me. It also activates, or produces, inositol triphosphate, which you can just know IP3. And then the inositol triphosphate will diffuse into the cytoplasm of the cell, getting calcium to release from whatever reserves are inside the cell. Now, the calcium ion channels will open because of the activation of protein kinase C, PKC. It's different from PLC. Just be patient. So this is a lipase. This is a kinase. This is going to use a glycerol. This is going to add a phosphate. and then we get calcium to enter into the cell, and it'll bind the calmodulin, and activate our enzymes so we can get work done. That should not have been a lie. So here we go. So again, we've got our, where's my little guy? Okay, we've got our hormone activating our protein. It's all stretched out and funny looking, right? So the activated G protein says, hey, open up my ion channels for calcium 2 to come in. That's exactly what calcium 2 does. And it can either come out of the endoplasmic reticulum or the sarcoendoplasmic reticulum. Here we've got our phospholipase C, our diacylglycerol, and our inositol phosphate 3. And they're all going to play an action role in getting phosphokinase C up and running. That'll keep these channels open if it needs to happen. And then the calcium 2 will stay here, bind to calmodulin, and activate our enzymes, which is what we need to get done. The examples for the first messengers here are going to be epinephrine, norepinephrine, oxytocin, hypothalamic regulatory hormones, and then several icosanoids. It looks all funny. It's ico, and this should be an SY and noise. Whatever. You guys are never going to forgive me, I don't think, but whatever. I apologize. All right. Most days my brain works. So when we have intracellular receptors, you've got steroid hormones that alter these. We see this, and the example that I use with this is bodybuilders who are abusing steroid hormones. And what we'll see is the mammary tissue gets larger in men, while the penile tissue shrinks and the scrotal tissue shrinks. And we see the opposite in women, where the mammary tissue shrinks and the clitoral and the hood tissue enlarge. So, and that's because it's impacting these bodybuilders who are abusing it at the DNA level. So that's going to alter how many enzymes get made, what structural proteins are present, and as well as the activity and structure of target cells. So for those people who, I don't know if you've ever seen a roid rager or steroid rager, they're kind of scary looking. But again, when you start messing with your hormones, you have really bad interactions that come about. So again, they can activate genes or change the rate of transcription. So, and then it also increases the rate of energy production, which I'm guessing is what the bodybuilders are after, but there's some pretty nasty side effects to that. Okay, so I like this figure because I feel like it's a little bit more clear. We've got a steroid hormone right here, right? And you can tell by this 3 carbon. Well, there's technically 4 carbon rings, but 3 of them are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons, and one's a 5 carbon ring, and they come right on through the membrane, through the lipids. They bind to the receptor. Right, and them and the receptor, the little steroid hormone, and the receptor come into the nucleus, right? So they're no longer in just the cytoplasm or the cytosol. They're now in the nucleus. They interact with DNA. They actually bind with it, and then genes get activated. In this example, so mRNA is produced. It's going to go through the whole mRNA maturation process, be translated into protein, exported from the cell, and then it's going to start to alter the activity and the structure of cells. So, I mean, that can be a good thing if you're trying to kill cancer cells, but it can be a really bad thing if you're trying to build up a whole bunch of muscle really fast. Okay, so these are not steroid hormones, but thyroid hormones. They do also come across the membrane, bind a receptor. This is the mitochondria, as a refresher. So, or mitochondrion is singular, as a refresher. Get our ATP increased production, so lots more energy, which I annotate with an E, a capital E. Hits the target cells. That's one short way. But also, again, you don't skip any of these steps that we just saw. You're going to use them again But again, instead of it being a steroid hormone, here we have a thyroid hormone. So it comes in with a receptor, interacts with the DNA, upregulates the genes that it interacted with. The mRNA is transcribed, and then the protein gets translated, and then yeah, boom, you've got your alteration in cellular structure and activity one more time. So hormone secretion generally is controlled by negative feedback. So things get slowed down, right? So if you have a stimulus, it triggers a production of a hormone that reduces the intensity of the stimulus, right? So all three of these can trigger hormone secretion. Humoral stimuli, if you guys don't recall this from AMP1 or from micro, they're talking about fluid stimulus. So, and they're chemicals in the extracellular fluid. We're gonna talk about the humoral immunity when we get there. So be careful when you're reading for a test or a quiz. Make sure you read either it's humoral or it's hormonal, right? And these are the hormonal stimuli are arriving, either arriving a hormone or the removal of a hormone. So that should have been a check. That should have been an X. And then neural stimuli. So you've got neurotransmitters. So you could consider norepinephrine or epinephrine, and there's other ones. But these are hormone, 3 different ways you can trigger hormones to be secreted. So your normal stimuli, somebody jumps out of a closet and says, boo, and scares you, and you go into fight or flight. Sorry, don't do that to people. It's not nice. I didn't mean to Google about it. But it could change your hormone secretion in a short time period, as long as the threat is removed. Okay, so controlling hormone secretion may only involve one hormone. Generally, that's not always the case. When we're talking about the intracellular fluid, the humoral stimuli, we're talking about hormones secreted by our heart, our pancreas, the parathyroid glands on the back of your thyroid, as well as your digestive tract. So if you've heard you are what you eat, there's a lot of truth to that. And if you guys are interested in it, you could look up, it's called the Human Gut Project. There's one, and then there's the Human Microbiome Project. And they've done some really interesting studies that show that what you eat impacts the microbes in your GI, as well as like how well your brain functions. Okay. So eating McDonald's for 30 days straight is not going to do you guys any favors. When we talk about hormonal stimuli, you're going to usually have one or more steps that come in between. So again, you have here, it'll be usually 2 or more hormones and then 2 or more steps, right? And then the neural stimuli is coming from the hypothalamus, and it gives you the highest level of control there. But I noticed in the book, they don't point out the difference between the paraventricular nucleus and the supraoptic nucleus. So those are just basically the nuclei of the hypothalamus, and I will show you guys that when we get there. So again, we're looking, well, let me see if I can go back and find the little figure. Am I a lost cause here? Yeah, I thought there was a bigger one for the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is right here, okay? And in there, they're not showing you, but there are these little nuclei that come down. I could have sworn there was a figure. Maybe later. Sorry if I'm making you busy. I apologize. You hear a cat crying. I'm sorry, buddy. I can't let you in. All right. So pituitary gland. Again, this is how it's spelled. I was trying to say that in an earlier video. This is how it's pronounced, which is kind of fun. It's like hypothesis, but with a puff instead. All right. This would be within the sella tunica. Turcica, sorry. The diaphragm actually isolates the pituitary gland from the cranial cavity. So when we look at the structure a little bit closer later, it's going to, it doesn't just isolate it, it also protects it from damage if you have a head injury or anything. All right, so it does hang off the the back end or inferior end of the hypothalamus and is connected by what the book calls the infundibulum. I grew up, I learned it as the stalk. So if I accidentally say the stalk when I'm talking about that, I'm sorry. What I'm referring to is the infundibulum. Right. And you can call me on that if you want. That's fine with me. All right. So the pituitary gland, they're going to include, they're saying 9 hormones, and one of the hormones is from the pars intermedia as well. So the pituitary lobe, they're saying that the pars intermedia and the pars, wait, is that right? Yeah, intermediary, and pars distalus. Is there a typo in here? Or am I reading it wrong? Okay, I'm overthinking this. Sorry. So 9 hormones get released. One of them is from the pars intermedia. And then we're going to use, again, remember these peptide hormones themselves bind to extracellular receptors, so outside, what we saw with this part up here, outside the cell. And then they bind the extracellular receptors, and they use cyclic AMP as a second messenger. Oh, here's the diagram. Yep. Okay. Okay, here's the diagram I was talking about. All right, so this would be your hypothalamus right here, right? This is where what they're not showing you is the right here, about here, and right about here would be the supraoptic nucleus, right? Supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus. And you don't need to memorize them. I don't even know why I'm bothering you with them. I'm sorry. I will move along. All right. So this is the cella turcica that protects it. And then there's a little sheath around here that they don't even bother to name anymore. Oh, no, they do have it up here. Cellular diaphragm. So if there's some, movement of the head that's really rapid, you can protect this infundibulum or the stalk. All right. What else did I want to say? I'm sure I'll think of it. All right. So the pituitary gland, all in told. So you've got your posterior pituitary, and we're only, the nice thing about this, so there's 11 total, right? 11 total. That's a really ugly 11, but go with it. All right. So let's say 101 plus, oops. Shenanigans. Minus the 9 I just mentioned, gives you the 2 that's down here. ADH and oxytocin. So they're actually including the pars distalis and pars intermedia, and releasing these 9. So your book kind of just lumps them together, and I'm okay with that. The easiest way to keep this straight is to say, okay, well, my posterior pituitary lobe only makes ADHD, no, ADH, sorry, the antidiuretic hormone, not ADHD. That's just what I have. And then oxytocin. So, all right, so it's, a lot of students really find it easier to say the posterior pituitary makes 2. So it makes A and O. And somebody had something funny. If I can remember it, I'll put it in chat. But it was posterior pit A and O, and it was something to do with race cars, which is why I don't remember it, I guess. Okay. So it's a lot easier to remember just this posterior lobe, or the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, is making 2, and then the other 9 are coming from, one comes from intermediary, which is your melanocyte stimulating. Oh, dang it, melanocyte stimulating hormone. That would be this one, right? And then the other 8 come from here, which is where we get our 9 from, up here. I hope that makes sense. I also miss microscopes and histology slides, but I guess I'll move along. All right. So for the pituitary gland, again, the hypothalamus regulates functions of the pituitary gland. Generally, it's the anterior functions, okay? But there is synthesis of ADH and oxytocin in the hypothalamus, okay? And then they get moved or transported into your posterior pituitary to be released and go act on what they're supposed to act on. So the hypothalamus secretes regulatory hormones, right? And that controls the control of that secretion is on, again, your anterior pituitary. So if we go back this guy, here's your anterior lobe, right? So here's the anterior lobe. Here's your posterior lobe. Here's your little eyeballs. Hopefully they're not red. That's kind of creepy. Here's your little nose. So anterior up here, over this way, right? And then posterior's towards the back. If you guys need a review, please, please, please send me a message and I'll hit you up. All right, so this is going to contain the autonomic centers for direct control or the exertion of such direct control over their adrenal medulla. Now, I've heard this word pronounced medulla and medulla, especially when people say medullary. So I'm not going to judge. As long as you guys smell it, spell it, don't smell it, spell it right. Shenanigans. Okay. So again, here's where they didn't differentiate between, you don't need to know them, so I'm not going to say it again. But if we're blowing this out and looking at it, again, you've only got ADH and oxytocin coming from your posterior, and then you've got one. Where'd it go? Oh, you've got 1 coming from here, right? And then 8 coming from here, and they just put these together. So they say that's 9, and that's fine with me. I'm okay with that. What you guys do want to go over though is, and remember, so sympathetic output for your adrenal medulla is going to be up here near hypothalamus, but you've got your preganglionic motor fibers, and the adrenal gland, remember, rests on top of a kidney. So if you have 2 kidneys, you have 2 adrenal glands. The cortex isn't in the core. That confuses my students, but think of it as the cortex of the brain, if you remember that structures. And then the medulla is going to be in the middle or along the inside. Okay, so, and this is where we're going to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. And we talked about ADH and oxytocin from posterior, and the other 9 being from anterior. Kind of covered that a couple of times. Yay. All right, so the anterior lobe, again, is the adeno hypothesis. I'm going to try to stick with just the anterior for you guys. So these hormones turn on endocrine glands. And then there's the 3 regions, the distalis, tuberalis, and intermedia. And then the median eminence. Yeah, that's back up here. The median eminence is going to be up here on, there you go, right there. So it's not labeled on this one, but it's right there. Is there anything else I want to say? Oh, when your hormones come in through the median eminence, they come in through your fenestrated, I say fenestrated capillaries, or fenestra window. So depending on how much Latin or Spanish you speak, it's going to impact your enunciations. Right, though nobody really speaks Latin anymore. Okay, so portal vessels. These link 2 capillary networks. The entire complex is called the portal system. Probably not going to beat you guys up on this. If I do, you guys will see it in the notes. Well, you guys will see notes pop up. All right, the hypophyseal portal system. This guy is actually important for regulatory hormones. getting into the cells for the anterior pituitary, and getting into the circulation in general for your body. Oh my gosh. So here's your hypophyseal portal system. Um, if you guys could tell me in words or, with a diagram on a test that you've got blood coming into this superior hypophyseal artery, right? And then going into, which is right here, boop. And then in the inferior hypophyseal artery, which this stop, not there, so it's right here. And then the veins are carrying away blood. So this isn't typical what we see, but they're showing it as deoxygenated, but now it's been loaded up with hormones from the pituitary gland. Oh, look, they do have supraoptic and paraventricular. Oh, they even had a neurocircuitry. You don't need to know all that, but okay. All right, so controlling your anterior lobe. You've got two classes. The releasing hormones and the inhibiting hormones. Again, this is what I said at the get-go of the first video, was if it had releasing or inhibiting in it, and the name of the hormone itself, it comes from your hypothalamus, right? And then it's going to act on your anterior pituitary. Yeah, anterior pituitary, brain part, sorry. Rate of secretion is controlled by negative feedback. So, like I said, most things in human anatomy and physiology are negative feedback. I like this figure, and they don't like this figure. So I like it because it shows you from the hypothalamus, you've got these releasing hormones, right? And then when they show, here's the symbols you want to know. So make sure you read the keys when you look at this in the book, okay? If it's got a red arrow, it's stimulating. If it's a blue line with two perpendiculars, it's inhibiting, so it's turning it off. So all these at the bottom, the second hormone, from the endocrine, from the target organ itself, all of these come back and inhibit. They inhibit the first hormone, and they inhibit the releasing hormone. All of these are going to come in, and they're going to stimulate all the way down. So I like it because it makes this, it's like a reading diagram for a circuit. Makes it a little bit easier than following it through all these, this crosses here and that crosses here. And, this picture is like a nightmare compared to this one. So, but again, so you've got hormones coming from your target cells, and your first hormones and your your second hormones and your first hormones coming back. Let me retry that. Hormone number 2 can come back and inhibit hormone 1 from being released. Hormone number 2 and number 1 can come back and inhibit the releasing hormones from being escaping the hypothalamus. So they're going to inhibit the hypothalamus itself. Okay, almost getting used to that crazy line. So these are, the ones you're going to want to get to know. And if you learn the name of the hormone in the name, so thyroid stimulating hormone, it's going to stimulate the thyroid. And it came from the hypothalamus. Okay. If you know adrenal corticosteroids, you know that it comes from the adrenal cortex, and it's got, corticosteroids in it. So knowing these names kind of makes your life easier. Again, I would suggest note cards. Okay, so here are the hormones from the anterior lobe for the pituitary gland. And where's the one? Oh, so this one is plural, right? And then I'm going to try to avoid using somatotropin. That's getting outdated. If I trip up and use it, I'm actually talking about growth hormone. And I even try to take this further and try to say, we're going to call this one human growth hormone, which is the same thing as if there's a little 8. Oh, that freaking line. You guys are probably laughing your butts off right now. Okay. Sorry, guys. All right. Yep. So gonadotropins, like I said, is pluralized. So we're talking about 1, 2, 3 hormones here. And then I'm not sure. This is if you have low production of gonadotropins, which are follicular stimulating I say follicular stimulating hormone. Apologies, but that's how I say it. Luteinizing hormone, and then these two are both stimulated by gonadotropin releasing hormone. But if you don't have enough of these, you're going to see hypogonadism. Sorry. I don't know how I feel about this figure. I feel like it's a whole lot. But anyways, so again, the majority of these hormones driven by hormones coming from the hypothalamus, telling the anterior what to do, what to release, where to release it to, right? And then what they're not showing is, well, they're showing it over here, but these two here, oh, shenanigans. Oh, shenanigans. All right, so did I lose my slide? No. These two here, antidiuretic, ADH, and oxytocin, are coming from the posterior pituitary. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is a whole lot. If you guys need to draw this out, draw it out. All right. I'm going to try to stop this video very soon because I feel like I'm over talking. I need to leave more room. So again, I kind of like this one. It's more simple. As long as you're paying attention to the key, you're good. For the blow up of this one, just so you guys could see prolactin. And again, this is not limited to simply females. Males can also lactate. I'm gonna stop this so you guys can I can